Hi everyone, I'm happy to virtually welcome you all to today's Ad Art Show 2020 Lunchtime POV from MVVO Art. My name is Emily Anastasi from the MVVO Art team, and it is my pleasure to introduce the next episode of the series Creativity Ambassadors in the Ad Industry, hosted by Bennett D. Bennett, principal of Aerialist and co-founder of 600 and Rising, featuring Eric Shiner, executive director of Pioneer Works, and David Sable, Senior Advisor at WPP. Welcome everyone, let's get started.
Good afternoon, or maybe early evening for everybody tuning in. I know you're used to seeing these conversations happening at noon, but why don't we kind of start an early weekend with a conversation like that?
I put a sandwich in front of me just so I could pretend.
Yeah, I've got dinner just like parked and ready for after this conversation. So as you've noticed over this last month, almost full month, just been talking with some of the great ambassadors of creativity throughout the ad world, and today is no different, but it's almost kind of a reunion of sorts. It's great to have David and Eric be on this conversation, and for those who are not familiar with like their ties to the ad art show, they've been there from the very beginning, helping the MVVO team get this to where it is today. So we'd love for you two to kind of just talk about like how you got involved with this.
Yeah, sure. I'll just jump in first. I'm Eric, and thank you all for having us here today. But Maria, the founder of MVVO Arts, reached out to me, and I was an executive at Sotheby's at the time. And when she came to me with this idea of bringing people from the advertising world together around the theme of art and creativity, I thought, wow, this is so important. It's really timely. And also with my background, having run the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, I knew a little bit about how an artist navigates the ad world, because of course, Andy Warhol populated so many advertisements with his wonderful illustrations in the 1950s. And then after a decade of working in that realm, went on to become, as we know, one of the most famous artists the world has ever known. So I thought, if we can inspire others working within the industry to push their own creativity through their individual artwork, that would be a great thing. And that's how the story unfolded.
And for me, it was even simpler. Maria and I worked together some 20 years ago, and the company that we worked in was sort of a new offshoot at the time of Y&R. And the whole idea was about that everybody was creative. Everybody in the company was creative. Our view was that ideas were coming because we were entering this digital age. Ideas were different. It wasn't just about, the outcome was not just an ad, but the outcome was many things. And so we looked for a different type of creativity, a much more broader creativity. So Maria, and after we worked together, we stayed in touch for all that time. And Maria came to talk to me. And the first time she told me about it, I had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. But because it was Maria, I said, yes, we'll be a sponsor. Whatever it is, we'll be a sponsor. And then little did I know that I'd get bit by the bug of it. And it was spectacular. I got to meet Eric, and Eric's become one of my very dear close friends because of this. And I learn from him all the time. But I think that to Eric's point, what's so interesting is that advertising itself is often considered art. And in our business, we recognize sometimes the art of it, sometimes the art of the idea. And there have been people like Andy who started off, there are writers who started off copywriting. But I think what this is doing is taking it to another place. What we're saying is, yeah, that's great. We're not interested in your ad art. What we want is your art, the art that's public, that's bigger. And it could be from anybody. It doesn't have to be from the traditional creative types in it could be anybody could have that art. And in fact, one of the winners the first year, I think she was in the top 3 actually, was a young woman who worked for me as doing research. And it turns out she was an incredible illustrator, and she had beautiful illustration technique, and she won. So there you go.
Yeah.
That is something that's also a really, really good segue to probably my first proper question for both of you, and maybe you can kind of lead this, David. How do you feel that ad agencies can find top creative talent today?
So it's always an issue for an ad agency where to find top talent. I think in the past, you still see it sometimes. You've seen there's been a whole argument about ageism and other things in the industry, and a dumb argument that I think had really no basis in anything. But we've always looked for people who could do television. Today, video. I mean, it's the same thing. They could do video, they could write, they could do whatever. And I'm not sure always that that's the right place to look. I think that really what we need are people who understand how to use their creativity to connect to people. So it's not just, yeah, I can do a nice video, or I can do a nice piece of digital something that uses technology and is targeted, and all of that is great, and it's important, and it's part of the process. So the real question to me, and I'm asked this all the time, what should people study? I tell them it's really simple. Really simple. Go and ask yourself why thousands of years after the Bible and the Quran were written are people still reading it and still emotionally involved in it? Why is the Iliad and the Odyssey still iterated in everything from movies to plays to pieces of physical graphic art or fine art? Why is it that people line up to buy the newest Harry Potter book? It's because those things talk to us, and the creativity in them is not just it's creative, it's that it talks to us. It draws us in. Why do we go see Caravaggio's David versus anyone else's David and study it and understand that it's the old Caravaggio and the young Caravaggio? And what does it mean? And what's his connection? How does he see him? Like, why? We see that because it talks to us. It connects to us. And I think that's what art does. And I urge all the creative people out there and all the agencies who are looking for people, look for people who understand what their creativity means. Not just people who come with a few words and who do really good things, and they do, and they're wonderful. But look for people who actually understand what their work means to others. How do you connect to it? I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense to me. I'm a fiction writer and a songwriter on the side, so I get it.
I'm a children's author, so there you go.
Well, I've got some. I've got to reach out to you in a few weeks now. Eric, would you like to? You have anything to add to that sort of thought? Given,
well, it's just absolutely, and thinking about what we hold valuable in society, art and literature and culture generally always wins. And certainly when we look at the art market, where over the past several decades, prices have been rising and rising and rising to really huge figures. So when one artwork, one painting, a Warhol, for example, sells for $250 million, that being a private sale of an Orange Marilyn Monroe painting a few years ago now. When one painting is worth $250 million, it shows that society, or at least those with resources, value art more than anything else, because there's not a lot that you can buy for $250 million. Maybe a skyscraper.
Not even a media buys that much.
Right. So
that's a great, yeah.
But just thinking about one object, and that's what I love about the advertising industry and its relationship with art, because it uses art in so many intriguing ways to share the concept of value, to get a consumer to want to buy in to something. And it makes a lot of sense thus that the artwork is so incredibly valued by society, and by those with the capital to spend that amount of money, that a consumer would also see that relationship, the relationship between aesthetics and value in our lives.
Yeah, Eric, I'll just build on that for a second. I was just thinking, the truth of the matter is that our work today has become so ephemeral because we create work that's meant to disappear quickly, to go away quickly, to be here and be gone. And when you think about some of the great advertising of the past, it's not that I'm looking back or thinking about 30-second commercials or print or whatever. It's just that they spoke to people in ways that people still save them and savor the art. They savor the illustrations. I don't know if you've ever seen the Sears and Roebuck wish book of the 1800s. And Eric, I hope you've seen it. But it's amazing when you look at the little ink drawings that are in there and you think about how they use those ink drawings. So people, and the copy, by the way, and the combination of the two. So imagine you were sitting in the Midwest in some side hut that with 20 feet of snow on top of you, and you locked down at 4 o'clock and it was kind of stinky in there and hot and whatever. But what kept you going is you read to each other the wish book, and you thought about the things you were going to buy, and you ripped out these pictures. That's what people did, and they would put them on the walls, and that became their art.
Yep.
And think about the interactivity of that. We don't have that kind of interactivity today. Think about that kind of interactivity. It sits there and it goes on the wall and sits all winter long. When that cold, miserable winter, that little ink drawing from the Sears and Roebuck wish book is sitting on the wall of these persons' side hut. And it creates a bond that with the art, and I mean on the advertising side with the brand, but forget that. It's just the art. Think about it. So I think that to me is exactly what Eric was talking about. The ability to do that is amazing.
Yep.
So a follow-up question to that. How do you create an environment that fosters and inspires that sort of creativity? It's one thing to bring the talent in that, is able to think like that, but how do you make sure that, that place that they're going to be working at for the next few years or beyond is, kind of keeps that energy up?
Eric, tell them about Pioneer Works.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm very fortunate to be the executive director of just that kind of place in the form of Pioneer Works, which is in Red Hook in Brooklyn, New York. And people have visited. I hope you had a great time. And if you haven't, I hope you come to visit us soon. We're actually reopening to the public this weekend by reservation via our website. And Pioneer Works is the dream of the artist Dustin Yellen. And he decided he wanted to create a think tank, thought hub, experiment lab to bring people from all sorts of different creative spheres together. That being the worlds of art, music, science, technology, and many other disciplines. We have a residency, for example, in music, in technology, and in arts, where we bring people from all over the world to come together and share ideas, learn new ways of doing things, learn new technologies. We do lectures, we have exhibitions, we do wonderful talks on science, and we bring really the most interesting people in the world together to share ideas, so that in a very idealistic utopian way, we together can envision and create the world that we all want to live in. And it's a really inspiring place. It's in an old 1860s red brick ironworks on the waterfront in Red Hook that was a site of industry in its early days, and now is a site of a new industry, a new path forward. And that's what we need in society. We need the agora, the place where people can come together, talk, share ideas, because in our digital world, that experience is becoming more and more rare. And I certainly hope that museums around the country and around the world serve that purpose. But we wanted to take it a step further, to bring different disciplines together, to share a story of creativity and of drafting a future together.
And so I love that. And that, to me, that's the bar, that's the touchstone for all of us. I think that in the past, the industry, our industry was set up in such a way that there was the creative group and there was the account group and there was maybe the strategic group that came about a bit later. And I remember, you know, and I started as a copywriter way back when and went to the dark side, as some have said. But I remember being in a meeting once and somebody had some idea, one of the copywriters was presenting something and it was okay, it wasn't great. And I suggested something, he just looked at me and said, no, you stay in your box. And I remember it was one of those moments that I don't want to say it changed my life, but it definitely put me on a trajectory of never allowing anybody to be in a box in our business. And certainly any of the businesses that I ran and the accounts that I was on, I wanted to hear ideas from everybody. Because I think that that's it. When you build on ideas, when you understand that creativity is multifaceted. And I think today the good news is that in many places, and certainly in many of our companies and most of our companies at WPP, technologists sit with media people, sit with maybe a copywriter, sit with a strategist, sit with somebody. So people sit together, and when you have that kind of a mind meld, you think about how do you use the technology better. You think about how do you target in a slightly different way, which means that your copy has to be written in a slightly different way, which means that your images have to be slightly different. So all of a sudden, the ability to have everybody together and share that kind of thinking changes the way you think about the work and the idea.
Yeah,
I think the
sure.
other thing is I often think about this, and Eric, I wonder what you would say, but you know, there's always this issue of a white canvas versus anything else. And in our industry, we don't always get the white canvas, right? Sometimes you're constrained. There are constraints. And I think even in the digital, you're constrained. There are things that you have to do. There's a target audience. There are regulations. There's all these things. So I always say that if you give me a white canvas, it's pretty easy to be creative. You just kind of do what you want to do. But if you give me a canvas that's got like some splatters here and some lines here and something, and you say, okay, now finish it, that takes a completely different type of creativity. I don't want to say it's more creative, but I think that it does challenge you in a bigger way. I use as an example. I don't know if this is a true story, but I think it is. But Michelangelo's David, most of the famous sculptors in Milan had passed on the piece of marble that he used to carve David. Eric's shaking his head, yes, so I think I'm on safe ground there. And they passed on it because it had a flaw, and they were all worried about the flaw. So it wasn't a blank canvas, it had a flaw. Michelangelo saw the legs, he saw the negative space of the legs in the flaw. And I always find that to be so inspiring that he created one of the greatest pieces of sculpture of that time in a piece of flawed marble that everybody else had passed on. Like people who were greater than him at the time, supposedly, had passed on. And so he saw something in it wasn't a white canvas. He saw something. So anyways, I just think that that's how we need to be like him. We need to like look at that and say, okay, it's like a little flawed. Now what do I do with it?
Yeah. And that's the great beauty and the inherent radicality of artists who see the flaws as inspiration so oftentimes. And oftentimes those are the flaws of society. So you don't even need the canvas. You just look at the world around you and sort of determine what you want to take on. And a lot of artists just do such important work to make our world a better place through their social justice efforts and looking at not material flaws, but very immaterial flaws. And also, many people, when faced with a blank canvas, are petrified and don't know where to start because there's a challenge there that you have to fill it or you have to somehow make it your own. So some people respond better when there's part of the equation provided and they can then make it their own through change. And, you know, that's where it really comes down to personality and one's own ego and creative drive to figure out, do you want to own that blank canvas and make it your own somehow? Or do you want to tweak and change something that already exists.
You know,
There's no correct way.
I'll add that I was down in Lower Manhattan about 2 months ago, and it was pretty depressing, I have to say. It's getting much better, by the way, for you naysayers. New York is fine. New York is coming back. New York is a real place. It's growing, and you'll go to Red Hook and you'll see Pioneer Works. You go downtown, you'll see people walking kids. It's still challenging. Like, I'm not kumbayaing here, and my head's not in the sand, but like, don't count New York out.
Ever.
But I will say that 2 months ago it was pretty dismal. And I was in Lower Manhattan. I got invited to a startup event, which was all outdoors along, one of the side streets. And it was kind of interesting and kind of small and but what fascinated me were the young artists who were out in the street painting on plywood and all kinds of stuff. And I must have passed 4 or 5 of them. And there was one group that was working with this startup group that I was with. And literally they were working in shifts. Each one, to this notion of working on blank or not, each one put in a piece of the work. And so they kept building on this big piece of wood over the course of a couple of hours. And I was so inspired. I started posting the picture and saying, like, okay, like, you people not get it? Like, you think everybody's dead and gone and there's nobody left in New York. These young artists are so energetic and so creative and so inspiring. They're here working after the apocalypse. So, I think that it inspired me to think, because I started reading all these apocalyptic novels. And so after the apocalypse, nothing exists except the cockroaches and whatever. Well, they're wrong, because the artists are there.
Right.
I think that's the truth. There will be artists. There'll always be art. There'll always be people trying to make art.
Yep. And even more beautiful when they're working together, collaborating to make a beautiful object or a beautiful idea come to life.
Yeah. I got to ask both of you, you've been involved with this show, in one way or another from the very beginning. What do you feel is kind of the roadblock for, more agencies to either like invest in their creative talent, or, be part of such a unique exhibition like this? I'm being someone who was a journalist at one point, obviously data, and this emphasis and investment in it is part of that equation. But, we work in the creative industries for a reason. And this is such a unique canvas for talent.
So I'll start with that because it's an agency issue. I don't think there's a roadblock. I think that when people learn about it and they know about it, they get excited. I think that agencies have been challenged by so many things. They're challenged by costs. They're challenged by their clients. They're challenged by so much that they have to focus on. They're challenged by a lot of their own internal, there's Cannes and there's New York Fed. There's all these different things that the agencies have to invest in for their creative people. And I think that, when you think about it, it's just a question of time and money. And so, I'm just going to move over a little bit. It's a question of time and money. And I think that the agencies, when they hear about it and they learn about it, get excited, as do their people. I mean, I think that it's really, I'm less concerned about the agencies being a roadblock. I think that if internally the creative people, and not just the creative people, but everybody says, wow, this is the kind of thing I want to be part of, the agencies would respond. But I think it has to come first from the creative community, because I think if the creative community, even though I've said that everybody has a right, like the young woman that I talked about before, has a right and should invest in this with their work. But I think that the creative community needs to be the ones to say, this is important for our agency growth, to make everybody creative, to celebrate our general creativity, the ability for us to do lots of things, not just one thing.
Yeah,
I think Leonardo, I always think that Leonardo da Vinci should be the patron saint of advertising agencies, because he was so eclectically creative. And did so many different things and worked across so many different spheres, but it all came from a place of creativity. So his scientific curiosity was fueled by creativity, as was his artistic, as was his military, as was his anatomy, his medical. And so when you think about all of that and the notion of perspective and color, I mean, that's exactly who we need to be. We need to be like that. We need to understand that this all comes together to create something bigger and better.
That's great. That's great. So I've got a couple of last questions for you gentlemen. Really thankful for your time. One, it's been like, this is 3 years for this show. Like, it started off at Sotheby's, and then you started seeing it in Link NYC's the year after. And now, you know, we've kind of flipped advertising on its head. We're using ad space for art. You know, like, you know, what are your thoughts on this evolution of the show? You know, I'd love to, you know, hear about that.
Well, it's just been so thrilling to see it grow over these 3 years and really become part and parcel of the fabric of society, literally, through its beaming out to the world at the Oculus, a place normally reserved on those big screens for advertising. And just the amount of exposure that the artists that participate in the program have to normally, in a non-COVID age, hundreds of thousands of people at any given moment. Certainly a few less right now, but hopefully as New York comes back, and I'll agree with David, things are looking really great in the city. And it's, you know, I was there earlier this week and it was so great to be back home. But it really allows a connectivity that doesn't normally happen, because so too often, sadly, art is reserved for certain types of people in certain types of places, namely museums. And that creates a very big barrier to entry for a lot of people who feel that art is elitist and only for the wealthy. And that's decidedly not true. And by bringing it into the urban fold and literally beaming it on these massive screens for everybody from every walk of life to see, and to see together, and to have a moment of inspiration or a moment of beauty or whatever, sadness, whatever emotion it happens to bring. I hope that it creates that spark to get people more interested, to want to learn more about art and creativity in general.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think also that the evolution has sort of been an evolution of life. So we're in a period now, there's sort of that's how it has to be. We sort of have to put it up there. I want to just go back to our first year, because that's how did I know this was going to be a huge success? I had no idea. And I think when we came to the launch of it, and Eric spoke, was one of the best presentations like you could ever. It was like going to grad school on art. And I think that everybody who was there was just blown away. And we had an incredible group, but we still didn't know what the outcome would be. Yeah. And I remember when we showed up at Sotheby's that night, and the place was packed. And as people came in and they're walking around with their, you know, wine or their champagne or whatever, and they're looking at the art, there were a few of Eric's colleagues who came over to me and said, "You have no idea what this means. We can't get young people like this into Sotheby's. We don't get this crowd into Sotheby's." So I was thanking them. They go, no, you got it wrong. This is incredible. And so that's when I realized that this was a real thing. We had real people looking at real art in the primo, other than a museum, obviously, but the primo auction house to look at art. And that was amazing. It was truly amazing. So I think that now that we're in the Oculus and it'll be up on the wall, which is kind of cool. You know, sadly, the numbers of people who typically walk through the Oculus is not now. It'll return at some point. But I think that that's part of it, right? We want to be, you know, think about what art was back in the day. So art wasn't just in museum walls. That's later. The art that we look at back in the, in the Renaissance and the pre-Renaissance, that art was urban art. It was in people's homes. It was in churches. It was in monasteries. It was in places where people came to be inspired. So it wasn't that you came to look at it, and you stood behind a velvet robe. It was there. It was in the room. It was your life. And I think that that's kind of what we're doing. We're putting art back into that place. We're putting art back where people go, where they walk, where they see, where they work. And that's big.
That is very big. And I just got some data in. It's been at least 60,000 people going through the Oculus per day so far. And obviously the stores started opening up again.
Yeah, the stores open this week. Mm-hmm.
Right. So things are picking up, and if on like really on the low end, if you're thinking 1.8 million impressions, ad speak, that's a pretty large amount of eyeballs throughout the month, getting to see some really great, like, unknown entities, because I mean that's also the joy in this. These are people who, their day jobs, they're standing right behind brands and pushing work out. So Absolutely. Now they get to be seen for their whole selves. Yeah.
And I'd also add to that people have an opportunity to buy art.
Right.
So here's an opportunity to buy art from artists who might become famous, might not become famous, doesn't matter, but art that you love and that you speaks to you and that you can put up on your wall and you can talk about, and comes from somebody that you have an opportunity to actually meet and speak to. I bought a piece the first year, a big piece. It's hanging up in our home. I love it. And so, of course, I had the advantage that, I had the head of Sotheby's Modern Art Group to help me pick out the piece that I liked. But the truth is that I had seen this piece, I liked it. And so I didn't quite tell Eric that was my favorite piece. I just walked down, I said, what do you think? And when he saw that piece, he said, oh my God, he said, I love that piece. I said, great, because that's the one I want. And so I bought this piece of art. Now I imagine that if I had bought it, I could see that in a gallery. I mean, easy. People who've seen it in my house think it must have been like whatever. And it wasn't, because it came from somebody from our industry, somebody who really is passionate and does have a side job on this and hopes to be in a gallery one day.
Yeah.
So you never know.
And it's so important to support emerging artists at that pivotal time in their career. I mean, imagine how happy an artist is when they sell their first work of art. And that's usually for somewhere between, from a work on paper from maybe $50 to $250 to a painting or a sculpture for maybe $500 to $3,000 or something like that for a young artist just starting out. And it's really, really important, not only financially for the artist, but also for that vote of confidence that somebody was moved to the point of parting ways with their hard-earned money to live with that work.
Yeah. And Eric, you are part of the selection committee for I would love to know your thoughts on this, like, really spectacular group of artists, and also the work that they have out there.
Well, I'm always just blown away anytime I'm ever on a jury or a judge for these sorts of things. Of course, you see the good, the bad, and the ugly, but you also always find nuggets of amazing creativity that you've never seen anything like before. And it really gives you hope that there are always going to be new, fresh voices coming into the system to change things. And it's, we're dealing with a very big virus in our world right now. And I always want to remind people that art too is a really great virus, because it gets into a system and it changes things, and it usually makes the system stronger and better through its radicality. So sometimes viruses can be really useful. And that's the great role of the artist, to sort of let loose their creativity and see what happens as it penetrates our world.
Yeah. So I know you gave a bit of a shout out to Pioneer Works, your day job. I'd love for the audience to know a little bit more about the Andy Warhol Museum and David, like, any, institutions that you'd like to give a shout out to before we end this.
Let
Well,
Eric.
thank you. Okay. I hope that everybody can visit Pittsburgh. The Warhol Museum is the largest collection of Andy Warhol's work in the world, and really is just an absolute amazing place that shows every aspect of Warhol and his life and his creativity. Looking at those early years in the 1950s, at his commercial illustration career through his incredibly famous pop art, Marilyn's, Liz, you name it, the museum has it, through to his late work through the end of his life in 1987. And it's in a 7-story building, a former warehouse, just across the river from downtown Pittsburgh. And it is a super fun place because that's the way we wanted it to be. That's the way we built it. And you'll hear disco music as you start to walk up to the museum. And if you came by car and parked in the parking lot, the stand where the attendant sits is a Brillo box, just so that you get a Warhol vibe from the very get-go. Because of course, Andy changed everything we know about aesthetics, about art, what can be art. He fully democratized art so that really anything could be deemed art, building on, of course, the legacy of Marcel Duchamp and the ready-made. But it's just very atypical for a museum. It's a place where you can go and learn, interact, watch movies, watch video, TV that Warhol made, seeing the full breadth and range of his creativity. And if you're not able to visit Pittsburgh right now, check out the website warhol.org, where there are a lot of fun digital and online events that the museum has been doing over the past few months.
So I'll add to my 2 cents to this. So obviously, the museums that we all love, and they're all reopening again in New York. And I think what's really interesting is what's happened in museums. So it used to be you went to the museum and you'd walk through the galleries and you'd kind of spend an hour and you'd look, and it was beautiful, but you'd sort of go from one picture to the next picture, so you get overload and you were never really sure. When you walked out, hard to remember what you saw. And then museums started curating around concepts, and concepts are way more interesting. And so what I always feel is if you go to a museum, go with a mission, go to discover something, like think about what it is you want to see, as opposed to just walking through the galleries. And it's more than just looking at one artist. It's like trying to understand, like try to find a theme that interests you. And by the way, if you go to most of the museum sites, you can find that. I found one museum that I had only visited for the first time about a year ago, was MoCA in the Berkshires. Just fabulous. And I think the way that they've curated that kind of an idea is pretty good. I'd also recommend, this is sort of a plug, but you'll forgive me for the commercial plug, but it really is true. There's a little gallery downtown New York called Bitforms, and run by a very close friend of mine, Steve Saxon. The reason that I love it is because it's all about digital art. But what makes it interesting is that it's not the digibabble that I call it, view of digital art. In other words, it's not like everything's on a screen and that means digital. It's about, some of it's about the output of the art. Some of it's about the input of the art. Some of it is about how the art hits, like what happens with the art. And so it's so interesting to me to look at the artists, and I've gotten to know some of the different artists and the way they think and the way they look. And then some of the work actually ends up, coming back to what we were talking about before, in commercial places. So if you go to the Nespresso store on Madison Avenue, you might remember there's a wall of the capsules, the capsule fronts in different colors that as you moves with you, but reacts to your form. And that comes from one of the artists in the gallery. And somebody had seen a smaller piece that this artist had done and then commissioned it for that. So I love this notion of art being commissioned into public space, because commercial space or public space, because again, that gets back to what art was all those years ago, something that we should all see and interact with and be part of our lives, as opposed to just being something you see in a museum behind a piece of glass or a rope.
That is great, and also a really great way to end this conversation. So Eric, David, it's been a pleasure getting to chat with you for this half hour plus, and I hope to stay in touch with you guys, and also thank you for just being part of this journey with Maria, and all these artists. So, and everybody who's been watching over these last few weeks, thank you again. Next week, obviously, is a very special week, given that we are shifting into Don't Silence Our Voices Week, artworks made by Black artists. This is a collection very much inspired by this time in cultural history and American history. So we're going to be amplifying these voices next week, and I look forward to talking to a lot of the minds behind the work, and a lot of the people who helped select and shape the work that will be shown through the Oculus for that full week in September. So I'm excited about that. Thank you again for tuning in. So you'll definitely see me next Tuesday. Tomorrow, you'll see my friends Erica Wong and Alexis Hyde, continue their weekly discussions on, breaking in as an artist and the business side of the art world. So they're tackling the role of the digital and, the platforms out there where you can promote your work that aren't named Instagram, because there's quite a few out there. So please make sure you tune in at 12:30 for that tomorrow. And I will catch you next week. So thank you again. Take care.
Thank you, Bennett, David, and Eric, for today's inspiring conversation. And thank you all for tuning in on today's live stream. All POV interviews will be available for viewing at mvvart.com and on MVVart's YouTube channel. As Bennett said, we encourage you all to tune in tomorrow for the next episode of the weekly live Lunchtime POV segment, What is Out There Other Than Instagram, featuring Erica Wong of To Practice Practice and Alexis Hyde of Softcore LA. I encourage you all to still go to our website and view our fundraiser on Custom Ink and purchase a branded t-shirt to support City Harvest during Hunger Action Month. The fundraiser will be up until September 30th, so don't forget to go check it out. And of course, if you have the chance, make sure you visit the Oculus, the Westworld Trade Center, to see the Ad Art Show 2020 come to life on the screens. While you're there, make sure you go to Italy and get a free coffee and dessert. Thank you all, and we'll see you tomorrow.